Hello everyone and welcome to Learn Live. Today our session is going to be all about the budget, which is going to be happening tomorrow. Today we're in the House of Commons library, as you can see, and we're with Matt and Anthony here, who have very kindly joined us to answer some questions. Throughout this session, if you've got any questions, please do pop them in the chat box and we'll get back to you about those. Would you like to tell us a bit about yourselves, please?
My name is Anthony Seeley, and in the House of Commons Library I'm the tax policy specialist, so I answer questions from members about anything to do with tax and the tax system.
And my name is Matthew Keep. I'm also in the library, and I'm the specialist for the public finances, so this is what the government spends, how much it taxes, how much it borrows and how it controls its debt.
Excellent, thank you. And now we're going to be watching a video all about the House of Commons Library, so sit back and enjoy.
I just want clear, factual information on what's happening in the world.
You can get the latest analysis of the most important topics coming from a resource that is entirely impartial, expertly researched and totally free. Why is it free? It belongs to you. It's the online research of the House of Commons Library. Now forget any library that you have ever seen. The Commons Library is actually made up of small teams of experts critically separate from the world of politics. Their job is to gather information from trusted sources and collate it into unprejudiced research and analysis. This research is then published for members of Parliament to help them do their jobs. And because of this, that information has to be top grade, and it's there for you to read as well. Our experts specialise in a massive range of topics and come from lots of different backgrounds, such as engineering, housing, medicine, climate science and transport. As well as these specialists, the library also has statisticians, economists, lawyers, scientists and doctors, and they write reports on a multitude of subject areas close to all our hearts. Because they do all this work for all MPs of all parties, library reports are always politically impartial. They have to be. Which means you can use them to get an in-depth understanding of subjects you're interested in, and you can be confident that they've been rigorously fact-checked.
Welcome back everybody. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we're going to go straight to some questions now. So the first question is, what actually is the budget and who announces it?
The budget is basically the government's annual assessment of how the economy is doing and what it's going to do to try and make it better. The main part of the budget is the budget speech, and that's delivered by the Chancellor, who is the minister who's in charge of the Treasury. That's the government department that's in charge of basically all the money. The Chancellor's name is Rishi Sunak, and he's going to be the person delivering the speech tomorrow to Parliament, to the House of Commons. The speech covers four things. Basically, how do we get where we are now? What might happen in the future to the economy? What are the government going to do in terms of spending money? And then critically also, how is it going to raise money in taxes to spend on all of the things it does? The budget affects everyone, so it garners a lot of attention. It's got a lot of ritual. You'll see the Chancellor always holding up his speech in his red suitcase outside Downing Street, and then he goes to Parliament to deliver the speech to members. Chamber is packed, there's not a seat in the House, and there's a huge amount of attention on exactly what he says to all of the members and the press there and people in the public gallery as well. There'll also be a lot of attention in social media, so there'll be comments during his speech, and then there's always coverage in sort of the news in the evening and in the newspapers the next day.
Okay, thank you. So the budget's really, really important, and I've definitely seen the Chancellor holding up that iconic case, so I expect you have as well. So we're going to learn a bit more about what it's all about. So my next question is, so the budget is really about the government's plans, but they'll be talking about it here at Parliament. What's the difference between Parliament and government?
Sure, yeah, great question. Basically, the government's in charge of the day-to-day running of the country, and Parliament's role is to scrutinise the government's job. That basically paying attention to what it's doing and then bringing to light any aspect where MPs think that ministers just aren't doing a good enough job and how they should fix things.
So Parliament hold the government to account?
Very much so.
Excellent, thank you. So the government will come into Parliament to announce its plans, and this video is going to explain the kind of things that they'll talk about and what happens.
Checking government taxation and spending. Parliament has the power to authorise taxes, which provide the government with the money it needs to deliver its policies and run services. Each year, usually in March, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the government's chief financial minister, carries the budget speech to Parliament in the distinctive red budget box. The speech contains details of any proposed changes to taxation, a review of how the UK economy is performing, and a forecast of how the economy will perform in the future. The budget statement is usually followed by 4 days of debate on the measures announced by the Chancellor. Each day covers a different policy area, such as health, education, or defence. Following this, the government presents a finance bill, which puts the budget proposals into law. In contrast to most government bills, the House of Lords has limited input to finance bills, as only the House of Commons has the right to introduce and amend bills whose main purpose is levying taxes or authorising spending. The Chancellor also makes an autumn statement in November or December, which provides an update on the government's plans based on the latest forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility. Find out more about the budget at www.parliament.uk/budget.
Okay, welcome back everybody. Hope that video cleared some things up for you. So our next question. We heard in the video that the budget is usually announced in March. Is that always the case, or do the dates sometimes change?
Yeah, it's a little confusing this time round. A couple of years ago, the government decided that rather than having the budget every spring, it was going to move it to the autumn. So we had an autumn budget in 2017. And we were going to have a budget last autumn. Obviously, as everyone knows, we had a general election then. So basically, this budget is that budget delayed by 4 months. It's possible, it seems quite likely, that after this, we're going to go back to having a budget every autumn.
And if we do that, we will also then have a spring statement at springtime, which is another opportunity for the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility, who deal with forecasting, to publish their forecasts and the government to respond to those.
Okay, great. So there'll be probably in the future a statement in spring and the budget in autumn.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is a budget coming out in March. Also, the video talked about the economy. Could you tell us what that means?
Yes, if you picked up an economic textbook, it would probably tell you something like the economy is a system for distributing limited resources. But I think in the context of the budget, really what we're talking about is the production and consumption of goods and services and the supply of money, and then how we as people all interact with that in terms of what we buy, the work we do, the education we're part of, those sorts of things. So in the budget, we will see the Chancellor will talk about how the economy is performing. So he'll be talking about how much the economy is producing, its output, and how that's growing. He'll talk about how employment is changing, what the levels are now, and what they might be forecast to be into the future. Okay,
thank you very much. So how easy is it to forecast the economy? And what is the OBR?
Right, so the economy is not easy to forecast. The thing with economics is there's very few sort of hard and fast rules. It's not like a science in the way of physics. And forecasting could probably be described more as an art than a science. So there's many things going on in the economy. And when you're looking to forecast it, you're trying to look at all these little parts and how they interact with each other. And as I say, there's no set rules, precise rules to say how they're all going to work together. So when you take that all into account, hopefully you should see how hard it is to forecast. Also, people are very much at the heart of the economy, and it's very hard to predict exactly how they are going to respond to different things. They're not always rational. They don't always behave exactly as you would expect them to. So another reason there why forecasting is very difficult. And also there's potential for shocks to happen to the economy. So when we're sitting here, well, when the last forecast was produced last March, the Office for Budget Responsibility, who I'll come on to in a second, when they were sitting there, they weren't thinking that potentially there might be a coronavirus on the way. But
Yes.
now we know that is happening, and this sort of shock you just can't predict. So the economy will then respond to that shock, and you couldn't know about it at the time. In terms of the Office for Budget Responsibility, they produce the government's official forecast for the budget. They're they're a body who are independent of government, and they were set up to have that independent role because in the past the Treasury used to produce these forecasts. So there was a suspicion that they were kind of marking their own homework, so to speak,
Right.
when producing the forecasts.
I see what you mean.
Because forecasts are full of assumptions and stuff like that. So if the Chancellor essentially is coming up with those assumptions, there was a suspicion that maybe the assumptions which best suited him were those which went into the forecast. By taking it out of the Treasury's hands, there's a hope that this might not happen.
So it might be more accurate.
I wouldn't say accurate necessarily, because forecasts
Okay.
are inherently uncertain.
Yeah.
And the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility themselves, say the chance of their whole forecast being correct is infinitely small.
Yeah.
So it's more about this impression of being impartial or independent as opposed to, and I suppose maybe there's a chance that might also lead to better accuracy, but
I see what you
that
mean.
is a bit debatable still with the uncertainty around everything.
Absolutely. So it makes more sense for an independent body to make the forecast.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. And the next question is, part of the budget is about the economy, but we also heard about taxation. What do taxes have to do with the budget?
Well, running a country takes a lot of money, and that money basically comes from the taxes that we all pay. Taxes charged on our incomes, taxes charged on the things that we buy in the shops. So the Chancellor will always use part of the budget speech to make any announcements of any changes to the tax system, to give people notice that it's going to have a big impact on they themselves. And that's also something that's really important in the budget as well, which is, yes, government needs to raise money to provide hospitals, schools, police, and all the rest of it, but they're taking that money from all of us. So that has a direct impact on our own living standards. So a budget is a balance between those two things. So that's why taxes are definitely at the heart of what he says tomorrow.
So it's important for us to kind of keep abreast of the budget, isn't it? Because it's going to affect us in terms of what we're putting out and also what we're gaining.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, so we've had questions from some of the people watching about who makes decisions about where public money is spent and how much power the Chancellor actually has. And that's from Christ School, so thank you very much for sending that in.
So I think it'd be fair to say that the Chancellor is the second most powerful member of the government, so second most senior behind the Prime Minister. And lots of his power comes from the fact that he is in charge of the Treasury. And as Antti mentioned earlier, basically they're in control of the purse strings, the government's purse strings, the Treasury. So any decision, so the Chancellor will decide how much other departments can spend. If they want to spend more, they need to speak to the Chancellor and he has to okay that. So his power very much comes from the fact that all sort of major spending decisions have to go through him.
Okay, so the Chancellor controls other departments like the health department or the transport department, that how much money they have.
Yes,
Is that,
yeah.
okay.
Obviously there's ministers in charge of those departments,
but
any
the
sort
Chancellor
of
controls their stream of
spending,
money.
yeah.
And spend.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Okay, so there will be debates in Parliament after the budget speech. What's the purpose of those debates?
You could probably say there are three. So the first is response. It's like members responding to the content of the speech and actually sort of breaking down, well, what does that mean for my constituents? The second thing would be, well, really questioning. We talked about the speech being sort of at the centre of the budget, but there's a lot of information that's published at the same time. So the debates are a great opportunity for members to sort of pull out from that, really important nuggets of information that we might not have been aware of. And the other thing is obviously object. This is, going through the government's plans and saying, well, this particular thing I don't think is a good idea, or I think it's going to have a really bad effect on my constituency or my constituents. So there's an opportunity there to really give voice to the possibility of asking government ministers maybe to rethink their plans. Doesn't happen very often in practice, but that's definitely the last purpose of those budget debates.
Okay, so the MPs look after constituencies, different areas of the UK, and it's their job to make sure that the budget doesn't affect their constituents, the people who live in their areas, in a negative way.
Or balance between them. We talked about the importance of balance in a budget between you're paying more money, but you're getting more back in a way. So MPs are teasing through that. And also, naturally, they're part of political parties. So members of the Conservative Party are obviously going to be, as well as responding to the budget and asking questions, are going to be supporting generally what the government's announced. And similarly, members of political parties that are not in government, the Labour Party or the or the SNP, are going to be making arguments against the government.
I see what you mean. So there's two factors there. They're thinking about their constituents, the people who live in the areas, but also they're going to perhaps respond from within their party.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we've also had some questions about what people can do if they don't think the money is being spent on the right things. For example, they would like more money to be spent on schools. So how could we change this?
Ultimately, for those who are old enough, they will get a chance to vote in the general election and vote according to their priorities. But in the meantime, people can contact their MPs, and their MPs have the ability to stand up in Parliament in debates, contribute and raise these sorts of issues. That if it was schools funding that they wanted to look into, they could raise that in debates in Parliament. They could ask questions in Parliament, so they can ask questions directly to ministers from the government who come to attend Parliament and answer those questions, or they can write questions to them and get responses from them. Also, and this happens all year round, this isn't just part of the budget process. And the spending that government departments make has to be approved by Parliament. And there's also ways in that process where MPs can bid to have debates on specific areas of spending.
Okay.
So they could have one on school. They could bid for one on school funding and debate that in Parliament. And all these things should hopefully influence the government and in what it's going to do. Also, members of Parliament can be part of committees that scrutinise the work of the government, and they will often look into spending areas, such as there's a Treasury Select Committee.
Okay, so we can contact our MPs all year round about issues in our area, for example, by email, write a letter to them, you can come to Parliament to speak to them, go to one of their surgeries on a Friday, and we can contact our MPs if there are aspects of the budget that we perhaps think need more money, like schools.
Absolutely, although at the end of the day, it's going to be a balance. We all have really strong beliefs about what we think the priorities, the most important things that government should be spending money on. There's no reason why we should agree. Government's in the task of taking all of those wish lists, if I put it that way, and coming up with an agreement, a final settlement of we're going to spend this on this and this and this, that we're all okay with. Although, as Matt says, at the end of the day, if you don't like the government and the government spending priorities, just vote them out.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you mentioned the Treasury Select Committee. Could you tell us a bit more about that? Can any MP be in a select committee?
Members of the government won't be in the select committee.
Okay.
And MPs are voted on to select committees. Apart from that, I'm not sure if there's any other restrictions for members of the select committee.
No, although generally the members that are on these committees, there'll be a selection from across the parties. So you won't have members just from one party in one of these select committees. We're talking about the Treasury Committee because they're particularly important in terms of the budget, because that committee's job is to scrutinise, there's that word again, analyse exactly what the Treasury is doing through the year, and also what Revenue and Customs, which is the organisation that collects taxes, they have a job of scrutinising what Revenue and Customs does as well. That committee has about 11 members, and you'll see after the budget itself, they will prepare a report on the budget. So trying to find out the most important things that they think need attention, and also asking questions of the government that the government has to respond to. So when any select committee produces a report, government has to officially respond to that report, answering any of the questions the committee has raised. In the run-up to that, actually, it's something worth looking out for if you are interested. The committee holds evidence sessions, so they ask the Chancellor to come and take questions from members of the committee, but also officials from the OBR and officials from Treasury, the department in charge of the economy, and other academics and experts. And they're a great way of finding out what other people are thinking about the budget, and also some of those trade-offs, the balances that ministers said, well, we could do this, but then we'd have to do that kind of thing. And those are on Parliament TV. So if you're interested, I'd look out for them. They're really interesting.
Okay, great. So the Treasury Select Committee kind of scrutinises what the government has announced in terms of the budget.
Yeah.
And they produce a detailed report. Yeah.
And that's just one of the things they do during the year. Just like the other select committees, it follows the work of that particular department through the year. So it will take evidence from officials through a year, but also do separate pieces, individual reports about other aspects of economic policy, because obviously economic policy goes a whole lot wider than just this one annual event that's the budget.
Yeah, so this is just part of what they do.
Absolutely.
And the Chancellor will have to go and speak to them and be questioned by them.
Very much, yeah.
Okay. So will there be other opportunities for Parliament to have a say on taxation? I think we've answered this actually, haven't we? But maybe.
Well, there's yes and yes and a bit more. Basically, because if you want to change tax, you have to change the law.
Yeah.
If you want to change the law, you have to introduce legislation. So after those budget debates, the government introduces a big piece of legislation. It's called the Finance Bill. It's just the general name for this. In that are all the bits of changes to the law that need to be made for the tax measures that were announced in the budget to actually have effect, to actually come into effect. Now, just with any other government bill, Parliament's going to scrutinise that bill bit by bit, vote on it, until finally, if it agrees the final form of that legislation, it can take effect. So there are lots of opportunities during that process for members to talk about the tax measures that were announced in the budget.
Okay, so once the kind of changes to taxation have been announced, they can't be enacted until they're put into law. Okay, makes sense. So where can people find out more about the budget in the future?
Well, we will be publishing information in the Commons Library, so that is commonslibrary.parliament.uk, so have a look at our website. So we'll publish a briefing which will give a summary of what was said in the budget, and we'll discuss how the forecasts have changed. We have other briefings on there as well about the whole range of things that government does, which could be useful. Apart from that, you could look at the Treasury's website. They'll publish a range of documents. So there's the budget document, but then there's also a lot of other documents besides it. So there will often be things, so if a tax change is announced, there'll often be another paper which explains a bit about you know, why it's changing, how much it might cost, that sort of thing. And also the Office for Budget Responsibility, they have a very good website, and they will publish their forecasts. But as well as just numbers, the forecasts it's a big document as well, which discusses exactly why they've made the decisions they've made on the budget and the forecasts, what assumptions they've used, those sorts of things. And there can be some very interesting stuff in there. It's a big document, but it's well structured and you find your way through it quite easily. And the Office for Budget Responsibility has lots of useful resources actually. If you just want data on how much government spending has changed or how much taxation has changed, there's lots of data on that and other things. It's a very useful resource.
Great, so there are plenty of places that you can find out more about the budget. Thanks very much for tuning in today, and thank you very much to
Thank you.
Anthony and Matt for joining us. See you next time.